Now we are going to discuss about the major participants, major foreign market participants. As we all know, banks. Definitely, financial institutions are integral part of foreign exchange market, and normally they are actively engaged in the form of like interbank trading as well as banker customer trading. So they are one of the integral part of foreign exchange market. Then we have business firms or corporates. These include like firms which are engaged in export and import of products among different countries around the globe. And basically, these organizations have to deal in currencies of different countries involved in the trade as a means for receipt or for making receipt or for making payments. So these are actually the business firms that do business in a foreign exchange market in the form of exports and imports. Central bank, of course, we know that it is the apex body which regulates the foreign exchange market. Right. The next one in this category is investment management firms or investment management institutions. These firms are normally engaged in the foreign exchange market for managing the funds of the client. They are operating for no basically they are operating in the market for managing the funds of the client. So it's actually a fee based, fund based and fee based activities which is being rendered by them, right? And the last important participant in a foreign exchange market is retail forex dealers or brokers. These lot, or they are otherwise called as global forex dealers, and most of these are commercial banks, investment banks, we know it, right? So they are dealing with the foreign currency exchange of foreign currencies, uh, maybe provision of foreign currencies for various business firms. All these are done by these retail forex dealers or brokers. So these are the major participants in a foreign exchange market. Now coming to types of foreign exchange transactions, of course, one is pure business transactions which are rendered by business firms, that is for exports or for imports. Second one is hedging. Now what is hedging? It's actually to minimize the hedging is a process to minimize the exposure to risk. So here also, hedging is to minimize the risk and avoid chances of loss due to, can you tell me what will be the loss, possible loss here? Yes, due to currency fluctuations. So that again is one important tool of hedging is derivative instrument. We already discussed about forward market. People enter into a forward market basically to hedge the risk which can come in future due to currency fluctuations. So hedging is another purpose of uh, another type of foreign exchange transaction. And the third one is arbitrage. Arbitrage, as we know, they are trying to make profit. Now, how do they make profit? They are trying to make profit out of price differences in two markets. Say, for example, they may buy from the spot market and sell in the forward market. It can also happen vice versa to take the advantage of price differences. Right. So arbitrage, they do not normally engage any sort of risk because at times short selling happens. They do not even own the asset which they sell in a forward market. They are trying to make profit out of this price differences. So that is arbitrage. Now speculation, speculation is done with the primary objective of making short-term gains from the differences in the exchange rates or maybe prices of the assets in the foreign market. So speculation is primarily an activity which involves a lot of risk. Here they expect short-term gains, and this gain is primarily from the differences in the exchange rate. So these are the basic types of foreign exchange transactions which we can find in a foreign market. Are you there with me? All these you know it. I'm just summarizing for you to have a recap. So broadly, for foreign exchange transactions can be categorized into four. One is pure business transaction, which involves imports and exports. Two is hedging. Hedging can also happen as a subsidiary to business transactions. Say, for example, I am purchasing goods from China and I know that I have to make the payment once the product is delivered to me. And I also understand that the payment is to be made in a foreign currency. So there is a risk here. When I am supposed to make the payment in future, maybe the value of foreign currency can increase. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to hedge that risk of increase in price by entering into a forward market. So are you there with me? So maybe by entering into a future, I purchase a futures, or maybe it's just an agreement to uh, curb or to minimize the chance of no risk due to increase in the price of the currency. Right. So that is also another transaction that is there happening in the foreign exchange market. Arbitrage, I know that it is basically a deal to make profit out of the price differences in two markets. And speculation, you all know that the primary objective is to gain by taking short-term risk. And the aim is to make profit out of the differences in the price of the assets, or maybe in this case it can be the differences in the exchange rates. So these are the types of foreign exchange transaction. Broadly, we have categorized for a better understanding. Okay, now we will discuss about factors affecting the exchange rate. There are different factors which can be categorized as external or internal. We have brought here the most important factors that will have a definite impact on the exchange rate. Inflation of a country. Inflation rate of a country is a strong determinant of the movement of exchange rate. If the country is facing a low inflation rate, definitely it will face, or it will have an appreciation in the value of its currency. The country will be having an appreciation in the value of its currency. So they move in the opposite direction, the inflation rate and the appreciation in the value of currency. The second factor which we are bringing here is the interest rate. Any sort of changes in the interest rate will have a direct impact on the economy, that we know. And that impact definitely will affect the foreign exchange rate also, because they are interrelated. We are going to discuss this in detail when we are discussing the theories in international finance. But for the time being, we'll just explain the relationship. That is, interest rate is having a direct impact on investments coming into the market, right? Which will also have an indirect impact on the exchange rate. So that's why we say that they are interrelated. Okay. Then political stability. Any sort of crisis, political stability can be brought in different ways. One is if there is a war being declared, you know what is going to happen to the foreign exchange market. So that is uh, a stable government, a stable political system gives confidence to the investors. That's what we mean by political stability. Now you look into the present crisis. It's not limited to one market. It's not limited to one nation. It's almost all the nations across the globe are affected by the present crisis. That is going to have a negative impact, or it is having, already we know that it is having a negative impact on the foreign exchange market. Many of the countries have almost started shutting down or stopping their business. So what we are trying to explain is any economic problem that affect the functioning of a nation will have an impact on its exchange rate. Right. Now, next we are talking about the next factor which we are going to talk about is government intervention. We know that even in managed float system, managed float exchange rate system, at times government intervene. Normally it is left to the forces of demand and supply, but at times government intervene just to control the movement of exchange rate. That is normally in a stressful situation when it is affecting the economy in a negative way. Government intervenes and measures are implemented to regulate the movement of exchange rate fluctuations. So that is why we say that one of the factor that can affect the exchange rate is government intervention. And the last which we are bringing to our discussion is about investor psychology. Of course, if the investors are very positive about a particular market, its exchange rate would be favorable. But if the investors are having a negative approach towards the performance of a particular economy or towards the performance of global market, automatically the performance of the market exchange rate or the movement of the exchange rate will not be favorable, will not be supporting an efficient market transactions, do not be supporting trade. So that is why we say that investor psychology is also one of the factor. And another thing which we have to understand is when there is volatility in the market, there is scope for speculation. When investors are slowly moving out of the market, speculators will step in, which will create more volatility in the market. That again will have a significant impact on the movement of exchange rate. So these are the general most important factors that can affect the exchange rate of a country, foreign exchange rate of a country. Are you there with me? It is all certain facts and terminologies which we are aware about. But only thing what we are discussing is we are discussing that in the context of foreign exchange market. Can we move further? Now we are going to discuss about the different types of foreign currency account. Okay. I put it here. You have three boxes, three figures. First one is Nostro, second one is Vostro, third one is Loro. So simple to learn. Nostro, Vostro, Loro. Now what it means, I have put it down. The keyword to that. There are basically three types of foreign currency account. Nostro is our account with you. Vostro is your account with us. And Loro is their account with you. Now can you guess what will be that? What is it I'm trying to say through these captions? These are Latin words, okay? These are Latin words. And the meaning of those Latin words is what I have put it here. Can you? Okay, we'll take one by one. In case of Nostro, this is a Latin word. It is an account opened and maintained by an Indian bank with an overseas or foreign bank. So here, an Indian bank opens an account in a foreign bank. For example, Federal Bank may maintain a foreign currency account with Citibank, New York. Now, why does a bank do that? In order to engage in foreign exchange transactions. Right. A bank, most of the banks will have foreign currency dealings. So they need to have source of foreign currency. So generally they will have a foreign account with any of the, sometimes their branch itself will open, their branch in a foreign location will open a foreign account. If they do not have a branch in that foreign location, maybe they will open an account, okay, opened, and that will be maintained by an Indian bank with an overseas bank. That's why I said Federal Bank opening and maintaining a foreign currency account with Citibank in New York. All foreign exchange transactions are to be transacted through Nostro accounts by Indian bank. Right. So naturally they need to have an account when it is opened in a foreign branch of another bank, of a foreign bank, right? That we call as Nostro accounts. Now I think you can guess about what will be Vostro account. It's also a Latin word which means your account with us. It is an account opened and maintained by an overseas or a foreign bank with an Indian bank. So this is just the opposite of Nostro. So you know the example. Citibank New York may open a rupee account with State Bank of India. Right. So that is, it is actually just the reverse of Nostro account. The account would be maintained in the home currency. That is, here it is Indian rupee. It will be maintained in Indian rupee. Right. So that is Vostro account. Now Loro account is little different. Listen to me very carefully. It is their account with you. In this case, it is a foreign currency account maintained by an Indian bank with its foreign counterpart. Okay. That is referred by other Indian bank during the course of correspondence. Are you able to follow me? I'll tell an example and then we'll come back to the same thing. When SBI maintains an account with Citibank in New York in US dollars, and Federal Bank, SBI is having an account with Citibank in New York. Now Federal Bank comes into picture. Federal Bank, that's the third bank here, refers the said account during the course of correspondence with Citibank. It would be regarded as a Loro account. That is, here Federal Bank do not have an account of its own, foreign account of its own. But for them to enter into a foreign transaction, they need to have a foreign account. So they will refer, first they will have an agreement with SBI. Definitely Federal Bank will have an agreement with SBI. Then they will operate it through the account opened by SBI, State Bank of India, with Citibank New York. So that is why their account with you. So there is SBI. You is here in this context is Citibank New York. Are you there with me? I'm going to repeat that once more. It's simple, just direct, but you just have to understand what it is. It is the foreign currency account maintained by an Indian bank with its counterpart and is referred by other Indian bank during the course of correspondence. So the other Indian bank is Federal Bank. The bank which is opened an account with Citibank is State Bank of India, right? So that is why their account with you. I hope you are there with me. So there are basically three types of foreign currency account: Nostro, Vostro, Loro. Nostro accounts is our account with you. That is, India opens an account in foreign currency in a foreign bank. Then Vostro is foreign bank operates an account in an Indian bank in Indian currency. Loro is when a foreign bank, that is when an account of an Indian bank which is opened in a foreign bank is used by another Indian bank for the foreign exchange transactions. That is, in short, when a bank remits in foreign currency fund to a foreign bank for credit to an account of a third bank, it is called as Loro account. Okay, so these are the three types of foreign currency account. We are moving further. Dear learners, now we are going to discuss about the methods of making international payments. As you can see in our slide, there are broadly five modes of making international payments. First one is letter of credit, cash in advance, credit cards, bill of exchange, and open accounts. Except the last one, the other four modes are very familiar to you. Now let's start with the letter of credit. It's actually a document, as we know, that represents the credit worthiness of the customers given by his bank in favor of the seller. So there are normally three parties. Other than the importer, there are three parties involved in issue of letter of credit. First one, the importer's bank issuing the letter of credit stating the credit worthiness of this particular party. Second one, the person in whose favor the letter of credit is issued. And the third one, the credit receiving or advising bank. So here, the financial institution stand as an intermediary and it actually endorse the credit worthiness of the importer. The second one and the third one we are very familiar with, cash, paying cash in advance before you receive your service, and then the credit cards. Both these methods are used for small volume of purchase where the value would be very less. It's not used for big export deeds. Now, the next one is bill of exchange. We know that bill of exchange is a negotiable instrument in writing containing an unconditional order signed by the maker directing a certain person. Here that certain person is the importer to make a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. So that's why we say that as a negotiable instrument. So bill of exchange is also used in countries where there is an active bill market, bill exchange market. Okay. And the last one, open account. Open account is the most popular one for a customer who is having credit worthiness. Credit worthiness means maybe a good reputation, maybe credit worthiness due to the track record of past dealings. Can be different reasons, but he should be having good credit worthiness. In that case, the most convenient mode of payment for the buyer possessing is buyer possessing credit worthiness is open account. Here, the exporter prepares the bill and as per the agreed terms payable at a future date. So when during the delivery, the invoice is given and it is for making the payment at a future date. This is the most convenient method, most widely used in case of large exports, right? So these are the five modes of making international payments. It's easy. Just for a discussion, we had a preliminary understanding of this. But see, there are many other small arrangements which are made in the international markets between the exporter and importer, but we discussed only the prominent ones. Okay. Now going with the next important part of foreign exchange market, that is foreign exchange rate theories. Some of the theories may feel or may look like outdated ones, which is not possible in the real market, but these are used to understand the market in a better way, right? So you can see in the chart in front of you, there are 6 theories which we are going to discuss. Let's take the first one, that is purchasing power parity theory or triple P theory, right? This is an economic theory. I put the main points. This is an economic theory that allows the comparison of the purchasing power of various world currencies to one currency. So here the highlighted factor is purchasing power of a currency in the international market. That's an important factor which we have considered here. The theory was propounded by Professor Gustav Cassel of Sweden. Gustav Cassel of Sweden. And according to this theory, the rate of exchange between two currencies, listen to me very carefully, the rate of exchange between two currencies of countries depends upon the relative purchase power of their respective currencies. So the rate of exchange or the exchange rate depends upon the purchasing power of their respective currencies. Later when I tell an example, it will be more clear for you. Okay. In this theory, the exchange rate between two currencies are said to be under equilibrium when the purchase power at domestic level equalizes the rate of exchange. So, equilibrium is a status when, okay, exchange rate between two currencies are said to be in equilibrium when the purchasing powers at domestic level equalizes the rate of exchange. Purchasing power equalizes the rate of exchange. Okay, I'm going to say an example. Imagine if a packet of chocolate costs rupees 72 here in our country, in India. Okay, in Indian rupee, it is 72 rupees. And the same quality, same quantity costs $1 in USA, United States of America. The same thing, it costs $1. Then the exchange rate will be in equilibrium if the exchange rate is, can you say? Can you guess? It's plain. I hope you guessed it right. Then the exchange rate is $1 is equal to 72 rupees. That's the status of equilibrium. I hope you got it. You want me to repeat it? That is, if you can get a packet of chocolate at rupees 72 in India and the same thing with no difference, if it is available in US for $1, then the exchange rate will be equilibrium if the exchange rate is $1 is equal to 72 rupees. That's actually the basic understanding of purchasing power parity theory. There are two versions to that. That is absolute and relative versions. Absolute is an ideal condition. The absolute purchasing power parity theory predicts that price levels will be same across countries. But both of us know that that is not possible in the real market condition. However, this is an ideal condition which has been prescribed by the proponent in the theory. We can use this as a benchmark to start explaining why cost of living is different around the world. We can explain why cost of living is different because inflation rate is different, currency value is different, market conditions are different, prices across the globe is different, right? So that is why we keep this as a benchmark to explain various theories in the foreign exchange market. Now we will discuss about relative version. This is an economic theory which predicts a relationship between the inflation rates of two countries over a specified period. Inflation rates, or it can be said as price levels over a specified period, and the movement in the exchange rate between their two currencies over the same period. So there is a comparison which is made between inflation rate and also the movement in the exchange rate of two currencies over the same period. So you are going to study about the price level in two countries with the movement of foreign exchange rate. There are plenty of studies which has been done, researches which has been done in this area. And the interesting factor is it varies, the relationship varies from time to time. At certain time it is very much correlated. Sometimes certain markets are very much correlated, predictability is very high, but the same markets in certain conditions does not correlate to each other. Some of the research findings are like this. So there is enough scope for further research in this area. So this is actually the relative version of purchasing power parity theory is a dynamic version of the absolute purchasing power. Here a better explanation is given to the movement of foreign exchange rate. by comparing it with the inflation rate in two countries. The theory states that exchange rates and inflation rates in two countries should equal out over time. That's what I said. That is, over the time, it can be highly correlated, it can be very much related, but in certain conditions, because of the external market conditions, it may vary. But the theory concludes that exchange rates and inflation rates in two countries should equal out over time. Okay, so that's all about purchasing power parity. So in conclusion, this theory was trying to explain the purchasing power of various currencies and its relation with exchange rate. The theory was trying to prove exchange rate is dependent on relative purchasing power. And there are two versions to this theory. One is absolute and another one is relative version. Right. Now the second theory which we are going to discuss now is the mint parity theory or the metallic standard theory. Now you can guess what this theory is all about. In this theory, when the currencies of two countries are on a metallic standard, see, metallic standard can be gold or silver, the rate of exchange between them is determined on the basis of parity of mint ratios between the currencies of two countries. Mint ratio is nothing but metallic content. For example, if you're talking about gold standard, the rate of foreign exchange is determined in terms of gold content of two given currencies. So a currency having more gold content will be having more weightage or more value as per mint parity theory. The theory does not have relevance now because now we do not go with the commodity standard foreign exchange rate, right? So, but however, we need to understand this was the basic idea of mint parity theory. I repeat, here the value of the currency or the rate of exchange between them is determined on the basis of parity of mint ratios between the currencies. Mint ratios, that's why I put it as mint ratios. Okay, that's about mint parity theory. Now the third one, what we are going to discuss is balance of payment theory. As the name suggests, the balance of payment theory of exchange rate holds that the price of foreign money in terms of domestic money is determined by the free forces of demand and supply in the foreign exchange market. It's very simple to understand because we see that across in our market now. So the value is determined by the free forces, the actual demand and supply in the market. It tracks the international transaction. I'm not going deep into that because it's very clear. It's based on the demand and supply in the market. If a currency is having high demand, the value of it will be very high. US dollar is a good example to that. Right. Now we'll go with explanation to the next one, that is interest rate parity theory. IRP theory is a condition in which interest rate differential between two countries is equal to the differential between the forward exchange rate and the spot exchange rate. It is little difficult to understand. Here, there is a comparison which is made between the spot market and the forward market. The spot market is nothing but the present market. Forward market is coming under the derivative category. It is a future. You quote the price today for buying an asset in future. We discussed about this. It's a derivative interest in investment, right? Derivative instrument. And the assumption here is risk-free interest rate is considered and there is no arbitrage opportunity. Now, what is arbitrage opportunity? Taking benefit out of price difference in two markets. Those opportunity does not exist in such type of market. That is also not possible in the real market condition, but that's an ideal condition, efficient market condition. That's been considered in this theory. Interest rate parity theory is a fundamental equation that governs the relationship between interest rates and currency exchange rates. Okay, this theory is based on the assumption that there is no arbitrage opportunities which exist in the foreign exchange market. It is used to anticipate the movement of exchange rates between two currencies with the existence of risk-free interest rates. So here, the movement of interest rates is compared, okay, with the exchange rate, foreign exchange rate and the spot exchange rate. It's actually the theory makes a comparison between these two rates and find a relationship, or try to find out a relationship between these two aspects. That is the parity between the interest rate and the foreign exchange rate in the forward market as well as in the spot market. In conclusion, what you have to remember is it's a comparison. Interest rate parity is made between the spot and forward exchange rate. Okay, now going to the next, that is Fisher effect. This is little different. Here we bring a concept called as notional interest rate. Okay, till now we had been talking about interest rate. Now we introduce another term called nominal interest rate. Nominal interest rate refers to the interest rate before taking inflation into account. Okay, are you there with me? Nominal interest is you do not consider inflation in the market. Is it a real one? No, but it is also considered for predicting the foreign exchange rate market. Now I'm going to say the next one. Real interest is the rate of interest an investor receives considering the inflation. According to Fisher effect, the real interest rate is equal to nominal interest rate minus expected rate of inflation. So, the theory was propounded by Irving Fisher. Fisher theory, the name itself suggests the theory was propounded by Irving Fisher. According to this Fisher effect, the real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus expected rate of inflation. The theory demonstrates the way that the money supply influences inflation rate and nominal interest rate together. Here, there was a relation which was found out between interest rate and also the spot and forward exchange rate. Here, Fisher brought about another theory by bringing one more variable into the study, that is nominal interest rate. Nominal interest rate is the one which does not consider inflation, whereas real interest rate is the interest which our investor receives considering the inflationary trend in the market. So, according to Fisher, the real interest rate is equal to nominal interest rate minus expected rate of inflation. That the theory is trying to prove through various examples. Now, there is another version to Fisher effect explanation. That is where we explain that as international Fisher effect. Here, the theory states that expected disparity between the exchange rate of two currencies is approximately equal to the difference between their country's nominal interest rate. So this he was trying to bring a explanation in the explanation within the country or within the national boundaries. It's extended to the international arena, and this theory state that expected disparity between the exchange rate, difference between the exchange rate of two currencies is approximately equal to the difference between their nominal interest rate. Now, what is nominal interest rate? The interest rate without considering the inflation. So, this is based on current and future nominal interest rate, and it is used to predict spot and future currency movements. So, initially he stated that there is a relation between the exchange rate of two currencies and also the nominal interest rate. Now, Fisher is stating that nominal interest rate, the nominal interest rate in the current and future market, okay, in the financial market, can be used to predict the future, or can be used to predict the movement of currency both in the spot and future markets. So what will be the currency market now, expected movement of the currency, looking into the nominal interest rate now, as well as looking into the future nominal interest rate, the future currency movement also can be predicted. That is what he is trying to prove through international Fisher effect. That is, he's trying to establish a relationship between these two aspects. That's why I put it as expected disparity in exchange rate is equal to the difference between the nominal interest rate in two countries. Expected disparity in exchange rate of two currencies of two countries is equal to the difference between the nominal interest rate both in the spot and the nominal, both in the spot and the forward markets. Okay, students, now we will discuss about the concept of balance of payment. Actually, balance of payment is a statement. The first thing which you have to understand is it is a statement of record of all the receipts and payments made at international level between countries. It is prepared on the basis of double entry bookkeeping system. That is the same bookkeeping system we use for recording accounting transactions. The same thing. It's a statement of record of all the receipts and payment. That is sum total of all the imports, exports, all the investments, and investments in the sense it can be inflow or outflow of money. Investments within the country or investments by domestic investors to another country. Maybe they have invested in a different country. That all, it's a statement which shows the final outcome of all these. So at the receipts from foreign exchange transactions, in this statement, as we do in accounting, in accounts, all the receipts from the foreign exchange transactions are recorded in the credit side and all the payments should be recorded in the debit side of balance of payment statement. It's all same. Statistical information pertaining to balance of payment are compiled by the following two methods. Just listen carefully. This information, that is, we can say that the details of debit and credit are compiled on the basis of two methods. One is current account and two is capital account. Okay, one is current account and the second one is capital account. Now, what is this current account? Current account on the balance of payment statement measures the inflow and outflow of goods, services, investment incomes, and transfer payments. I have put it here. It measures your trade in goods, trade in services, investment incomes, not investment incomes, and transfer payment, net transfer payments, like your balancing. If there is a deficit here, you can transfer it from the capital account to here. So that we will explain later. So these are the general components of current account. Now we will look into, okay, as I said, a deficit on the current account means that here if you have a deficit, it means that your value of imports is greater than the value of exports, and a surplus is vice versa, because when you have receipts, it's in credit side, right? In surplus, the credit account, the surplus on the current account means that the value of imports is less than the value of exports, or in other words, you have exported more than your total imports. Right. So current account talks about trade in goods, trade in services, investment incomes, right? Now coming to capital account. Capital account of BOP records all those transactions between residents of a country and the rest of the world which cause a change in, just listen to me, which cause a change in the asset or liabilities of residents or its government. So here it's basically talking about the investments. It is related to claims and liabilities of financial nature. This account is used to finance deficit in current account, or at times it absorbs surplus of current account also. That's just a balancing system. Since capital account is concerned with financial transfers, it does not have direct impact on income, output and employment of a country. Why? Because it is just concerned with direct impact. Indirect impact, of course, there is. When you have more investments coming into a country, you have a lot of employment opportunities that is generated out of it, but there is no direct impact of that. Direct impact is created through current account transactions. The main components of capital account are borrowings and lendings from abroad, investments to and from abroad, change in the foreign exchange reserve. Every country will be having foreign exchange reserve. The change in that will be reflected in the capital account. The reserve can be maintained in gold, can be maintained in dollar. It's a type of investment. So that is reflected in the capital account. Surplus in capital account arises when the same rule, when the credit items are more than the debit items. It indicates net inflow of capital. When you get money, right, that's what we mean by credit. This is, as we said, no, the book entry, bookkeeping, same. Then deficit in capital account arises when debit items are more than the credit items and indicate net outflow of capital. So here your outflow is more, which means people are pulling money from India to different countries across the globe. Maybe they are not confident about the return in India. There are situations when you have a financial stress within the country, capital will be pulled out to different parts of the world where the return is high. So that is a situation in case of deficit. Balance on current account and balance on capital account are interrelated. That's why I said in the beginning, a deficit in current account must be settled by a surplus on capital account. It is reverse. In the surplus in the current account must also be matched by a deficit in the capital account. That's just vice versa, right? So we were talking about balance of payment. Now, what is balance of payment? The first thing that should come into your mind is it's a statement. It's a statement of record of all the receipts and payments made by a country at international level. So it includes two types of accounts. One is current account and capital account. See, as we say, no, in balance sheet, when we are arranging, we say that short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities, fixed asset. As we say, we categorize based on the nature of the asset. So same way here also, there is a categorization which is done based on the nature of the items that appear in the statement. That's what we call as current account and capital account. Are you there with me? Now, if I say disequilibrium in balance of payment, you will understand what it is. What is disequilibrium in capital account, in balance of payment? When there is a surplus or deficit in BOP statement, we call that as a disequilibrium. A country's balance of payment is said to be in disequilibrium when its receipts are not equal to its payments. Simple. Same as we follow in a double entry principle. When your receipts are not equal to your payments, you say there is a system, your account is not balancing. That is the stage of disequilibrium. Now, what can be the causes of disequilibrium? There can be many causes. The most prominent ones are economic factors, like say there is an, when you look into the current account, you can see that when your exports are more than your import, when your imports are more than your export, there is a disequilibrium. That is imbalance between exports and imports. Or maybe you, one particular year, you had large scale expenditure which causes large imports. Say, for example, we are going for a shipping project. We had import a lot of machinery into the country from different nations. So that leads to a lot of investments, imports, and the expenditure is high. This can lead to an disequilibrium. And then there can be cyclical fluctuations like recession, depression, financial crisis. All these can reflect and cause disequilibrium in BOP. Then the next which I put here is political factors. Of course, political instability and disturbance can cause large outflow. As I said, no, the first thing uh, which needs to be there in a country for attracting investment is political stability. People should have confidence in the government, on their plans, on their development plans, so that if it is not present, then capital will go out of the country. Large outflow will happen, which will cause disequilibrium in BOP statement. Then social factors, population increase, demographic profile change. Say in UK, they are facing that. There is a huge demographic profile change. Majority come under the senior citizen category. So such demographic changes, social factors also can cause disequilibrium in the BOP statement. Natural calamities. See, now this is a crisis which we are facing, which is affecting the foreign exchange market, which will again in the long run bring a disequilibrium in BOP, because now countries have stopped with production. This will affect the exports. Again, the the manufacturing sector is stagnant for some time. This will affect the productive activity coming up in the country, which again will fall on the BOP statement as an impact. So this all can be the result of economic factors, political factors, social factors, natural calamities, and it is said that disequilibrium needs some remedial measures. It cannot be continuing like that, because in that case, the development of a nation would be severely affected because of that. The remedial measures, actually, we can correct it in two ways, can be categorized into two. One is automatic correction measures, and the second one is deliberate correction measures. As the name indicates, in case of automatic correction measures, here the assumption is any sort of disequilibrium in BOP may be automatically corrected in due course. Because here, as we say, demand and supply pattern keeps on changing, this will also restore the disequilibrium position of BOP. That's the assumption which is made here. It is true also, to some extent that is true, because everything is a cycle in case of the different phases of economy, like boom, depression, recession. All these are different phases. So there is some kind of automatic correction which will happen in the disequilibrium in every phenomenon. Likewise, it is applicable in case of BOP also. However, some countries which are following the fixed exchange rate system, they might find it little difficult because they have made the system rigid. So automatic correction of BOP in case of disequilibrium can happen only when some adjustments or corrections are made within variables like price, interest, income, flow of capital. Likewise, they have to make some kind of deliberate corrective measures. Right. So we are talking about the deliberate corrective measures. Deliberate corrective measures or correction measures can be categorized into two. One is monetary measures and another one is trade measures. Monetary measures Examples can include like expansion or contraction of money supply. You're pumping in or you're pulling out money depending upon the value movement. So that is just to, it will affect the overall demand and supply of money available in the market. And another popular method is devaluation of the currency to encourage exports, and maybe devaluation will automatically discourage imports. Then controlling and regulating the foreign exchange reserves and earnings. All these are some of the monetary measures which are taken by the government and the central bank. Then trade measures can include, if you want to promote exports, if disequilibrium is in the current account and you want to promote export, naturally export promotion by abolition of export related duties, issue of subsidies on export of certain products, such measures will be adopted. And if you find that too much of import is your threat, which is causing disequilibrium in your BOP, naturally export control measures like imposition of heavy import duties, licensing requirements, putting ban on import of some less essential commodities, etc. Such measures will be adopted by a country. So in short, remedial measures for correcting the disequilibrium in BOP can be categorized into two. One is automatic correction, depending upon the natural forces of demand and supply. The second one is deliberate correction measures, which is categorized into two. One is monetary measures, another one is trade measures. Monetary measures will have direct impact on money supply, whereas trade measures mostly concentrate on import and export measures, or regulating the imports and exports to a country, right? So that's it. Now we are going to discuss about something called as currency convertibility. That's very much essential for facilitating the foreign exchange transactions. So can we discuss on that? Are you ready for it? I hope the answer is yes. Yeah, we are moving into currency convertibility. So what is currency convertibility? It is the process of converting the currency of a country to a globally accepted currency for facilitating international trade. I put it here, process of converting the currency of one country, of a country, to a global currency. And the purpose behind that is to facilitate the international trade. And when we look from the perspective of currency convertibility, there are broadly two types of currency convertibility. Or currency convertibility is applicable to transactions in current account and also transactions in capital account. Now we will see what is current account convertibility. Can you guess? Does India have current account convertibility? If your answer is yes, you're right. In India, there is full current account convertibility since August 1993. Okay. Now we will see what is this current account convertibility. Current account convertibility means the freedom to convert domestic currency into foreign currency. That is, from Indian perspective, it is your freedom to convert Indian rupee into dollar or yen without any restriction, and also vice versa. Vice versa is needed when you want to when you say, for example, you are paid in dollar when you exported your products. With dollar in India, you cannot purchase it. Of course, some of the transactions you can render it, but still you would like to convert that into Indian rupee. That's vice versa. You want to convert dollar into Indian rupee, or maybe if you want to pay for your imports, you want to pay for your foreign exchange transactions, you really have to convert Indian rupee into dollar or maybe some other accepted currency. So that is the freedom which you talk about, current account convertibility. And current account convertibility is one part of currency convertibility. The second part is capital account convertibility. I'm just saying an example for you to remember it easily. Example for current account convertibility. If there is a current account convertibility for rupee, an exporter can sell the US dollars or any other foreign currency which he may, as I said, no, which he may have obtained from exporting a commodity at the market determined exchange rate, which means that there is no control, foreign exchange control. He or she can easily convert that into Indian or our domestic currency, right? So that is what we mean by current account convertibility. Now we will discuss about capital account convertibility. It implies freedom of currency conversion related to capital inflows and outflows. You got the difference? Other one was related to imports, exports, like that. You wanted to get a domestic currency. You wanted to convert the domestic currency to foreign currency, likewise. But here, this is related to inflows and outflows, which means investments. So it is not just the currency convertibility adjustment, but more than that, it involves the freedom to invest in financial assets of other countries. The context is different, little more serious. Capital account convertibility is thus the freedom of foreign investors to purchase Indian financial assets or financial assets, example, shares, bonds, all that. And also that of the domestic citizens like Indians to purchase foreign financial assets. So that is concerned with capital account convertibility. Now let me ask you whether we have this capital account convertibility in India. If your answer is yes, you're right, but not fully. Partial convertibility. In India, there is partial capital account convertibility, which means foreign currency conversion for the purpose of capital account transactions are restricted by RBI. Permissions are granted only to certain specific transactions. Anywhere in the world, you cannot take your money and invest. You have to get prior sanction when you pull out your fund and invest in some other nation. Same way, anyone cannot come and invest in India. It has to come through the right channel by obtaining permission. So that's why we say that there is only partial capital account convertibility in India. But we have full currency, we have full current account convertibility. I hope you are there with me. That is, we have full current account convertibility. I think I should correct it here, right? I have put it as currency. I'm sorry. It is current account convertibility. Yes, I corrected it. Okay, so that's it. We were talking about currency convertibility. To conclude, currency convertibility is a process of converting the currency of a country to another globally accepted currency. I hope we have given a brief introduction to all the aspects of international monetary system. Now, as I always say, the ball is in your court. You have to read a lot of study materials to understand it very clearly, right? The subject is very vast. A deep reading is needed to understand it fully. I know that you will do it. I have a small assignment for you which is connected with this module. This is a fourth module. The assignment is currency convertibility in India and overview. You have to prepare the problems, the prospects, the impact. That is a short note about currency convertibility in India. Your due date is on 6th. Word count is 2,500 to 3,500. This carries a weightage of 10%. And as always, I say, I will not tolerate plagiarism. Right? So please take care of that. And you can complete the assignment and update in our Edmodo platform on any date from today. The link is already there. It's up to you to decide when is your day for uploading. And our next module, the 5th module, is on international investments. I hope you are there with me. And for the next international investments, before we actually start the session, if you can have a preliminary reading, that would be great. So thank you, learners. Have a happy learning experience.